From rejection to freedom, kicked out of home, abandoned by family, and finding my own path, my journey of pain, art, and overcoming. I never thought I'd have the courage to open my heart this way, but I feel I need to tell someone, even if it's just strangers on the internet. I grew up in a family where love and affection were tied to success and appearance. If you weren't the golden child, there was no room for affection. My name is Joaquim, I'm 33 years old, and my story begins at a time when my life seemed mapped out, as if I had no voice, as if my every choice was already determined. My parents, Ana and Jorge, have always been obsessed with status and success. From an early age, my sister Joanna and I were pressured to follow specific paths that didn't reflect who we truly were. The breaking point came when I realized that my dream, the only one that was truly mine, would never be validated within that home. I've always loved art, painting, drawing, creating worlds through colors and shapes. But to them, it was nothing more than a useless hobby. At 17, the pressure to enter medical school became unbearable, and I found myself caught between the fear of displeasing my parents and the desire to breathe my first breath as a free person. It was at that moment that a simple decision, but with enormous consequences, completely changed the trajectory of my life. That year, my parents announced to me clearly and bluntly that I had no choice. I was going to be a doctor. There was no room for questioning, for doubt, for any thought that didn't align with their wishes. Medicine is the future. It's what will give you security and status, my father would say, with that authoritative tone that made me feel small. My mother reinforced this with looks of disappointment, as if every negative word I could utter were a personal offense. But my heart, even so young, knew that this wasn't my life. I loved painting, spending hours creating images that existed only in my mind, but I was never allowed to dream about it. I remember as if it were yesterday, the day I won my first drawing competition at school. My mother simply said, "That won't put food on your plate." And my father didn't even look up from the newspaper. Every word, every gesture was a brick in the wall of fear and guilt that built my adolescence. Still, I tried. I tried to fit in, I tried to please, I tried to be the perfect son, the son they dreamed of. But the more I tried, the more I felt an emptiness growing inside me, an emptiness that no grade, no praise, no applause would be able to fill. At 18, I entered medical school. My parents' joy seemed to light up the entire city, but inside I felt the ground slipping beneath my feet. The classes, the internships, the exams, everything crushed me, not because of the technical difficulty, but because of the lack of meaning. I spent hours in crowded classrooms, listening to professors talk about illnesses and treatments, while my heart screamed that I didn't belong there. My body reacted in ways I'd never experienced before: sleepless nights, lack of appetite, tremors before exams. Each morning felt like a Herculean effort to deceive the world and myself. My sister Joanna, on the other hand, was celebrated. She embraced the path my parents imposed on her. She was the pride of the family. And me, I was the silent burden, the child who couldn't live up to expectations. Envy mixed with guilt gnawed at my chest. Often, after internships, I sat alone in the school parking lot, trying to understand why my passion for life wasn't enough to change what others wanted me to be. The pressure became unbearable. I began to suffer anxiety attacks. There were days when my body wouldn't obey me. My hands shook, my stomach ached, my mind swirled in a whirlwind of guilt and anger. I cried in secret, in the college bathroom, afraid of being seen, afraid my parents would find out I couldn't cope. At 20, I made the hardest decision of my life. I dropped out of college. I didn't tell anyone, I simply stopped going. But as always, secrets have an expiration date. When my parents found out, the explosion happened. My father called me a disgrace. My mother said I was the biggest disappointment she's ever had. I was thrown out of the house that night. I took only a backpack with clothes, my sketchbooks, and the feeling that my life had fallen apart. I slept on the floor of a friend's house, cold, hungry, and with a hole in my chest that seemed impossible to fill. The following years were a constant test of endurance. I had no money, no health insurance, no support. I worked odd jobs, washing glasses in bars, handing out flyers, doing anything that allowed me to survive. At night, when everything was quiet, I painted. Each brushstroke was an attempt to reconnect with who I truly was. But the world seemed to conspire against me. I went hungry, had sleepless nights, and suffered constant anxiety attacks. I remember once nearly being run over while crossing a deserted street, tired, distracted, wondering if my life would ever have meaning. Yet there were moments that gave me hope. I sold my first painting at a small flea market. A woman approached, looked at it and said she felt something profound. She paid $200. In that moment, I felt for the first time that perhaps I could survive being myself, even if the whole world was against me. In the months following my expulsion, I realized that surviving alone was much harder than I'd imagined. Each day was a battle against physical exhaustion, hunger, and the feeling that I didn't belong anywhere. Working as a waiter or store assistant was exhausting. My hands grew calloused, my body ached, and I felt a constant lump in my throat. Still, I returned to my drawings every night, as if it were the only oxygen keeping me alive. Often, I drew until dawn, my eyes burning, my hands trembling, knowing no one would see my work. And yet, something inside me screamed not to give up. Each brushstroke was a silent affirmation that I existed for myself, not for my parents. I had to learn everything on my own. How to deal with clients, how to sell my work, how to promote myself. Mistakes were constant. I charged too little, lost important clients, became financially disorganized, and went days without eating properly because I couldn't balance expenses and investments. But each failure was a lesson. I made so many mistakes I could write a book about. Failures, and yet every small success, every smile from someone who bought or admired my art, made all the effort seem worthwhile. That's how I began rebuilding my self-esteem, brick by brick, without even realizing it. Isolation punished me in ways I never imagined. I spent hours alone in my makeshift room, staring at my canvases, feeling a mixture of love for what I created and hopelessness for what life had in store for me. I remember nights when the rain would fall heavily and I would curl up on the couch, listening to the patter of the drops and wondering if my family would ever understand who I truly was. The dreams my parents had imposed on me still haunted my mind. It was a constant conflict. I wanted to prove to myself that I was capable, but I also felt a deep, almost physical rage that crushed me. My muscles tensed, my hands shook, and my heart raced just remembering the rejection. I began to question whether all the effort was worth it, if I would ever be recognized for who I truly am. But every time someone told me that my art had meant something to them, that it touched something deep inside, I felt a warmth rise in my chest, an energy that told me to keep going. I learned to transform pain into fuel, to channel frustration into colors, textures, and shapes that reflected not only my worldview, but also my personal struggle. This intense, exhausting daily battle shaped not only my career, but also my character, my resilience, and my ability to stand firm even when all seemed lost. Over time, I realized I needed to professionalize my art. It wasn't enough to just paint. I needed to learn about social media, marketing, and networking. Each step was a painful discovery. I mispriced, missed opportunities, and often discouragement made me want to give up. I even spent entire days without sleep, planning strategies that never worked. I remember once selling a painting for a very low price because I didn't want to turn away someone who seemed interested. At that moment, I felt self-loathing, regretful, and a pang of humiliation, but I realized that each mistake taught me something. I began exhibiting in small cafes, neighborhood galleries, and art fairs. Each step was slow, each achievement small, but at the same time, invaluable. My financial situation was still precarious, but I was building something that was my own, something no one could take away from me. I felt physical pain, of course. My back ached from carrying canvases. My hands stiffened from painting non-stop, but the feeling of forging my own path made up for it all. Little by little, I began to realize that the freedom to choose my own life, even with all the obstacles, was more valuable than any approval my parents could give me. At 27, I landed my first significant exhibition at a local gallery. It was a moment that brought me a mixture of fear and indescribable joy. I remember the butterflies in my stomach, my sweaty hands, and my racing heart as I hung my paintings, waiting for people's reactions. When the first visitors began to compliment, buy, and take photos of my canvases, I felt such intense happiness that it made me forget for a few minutes all the years of suffering and loneliness. Every positive comment, every smile or gesture of appreciation reinforced the certainty that I had made the right choice, that abandoning medicine and following my passion was the path I needed to take. But even with this victory, life still tested me. Internal conflicts returned, questioning whether I deserved all this, whether I was good enough, whether I would ever have true stability. These doubts haunted me night after night, but each morning as I looked at my canvases and saw what I had created with my own hands, I felt a silent strength growing within me. It was as if every difficulty, every sleepless night, every hidden tear had been transformed into fuel to continue, to create, to not turn back. Still, my life wasn't perfect. While I struggled to establish myself, my sister Joanna followed the path my parents had always dreamed for us. She easily entered medical school, receiving accolades, awards, and constant recognition. I watched from afar, feeling a mixture of pride and frustration. Pride because she worked hard, but frustration because it seemed the world rewarded her more than me, even though she didn't share the same passion for what she did. Things began to change years later when Joanna failed to complete her degree and accumulated enormous debts. And it was at that moment that my family came back into my life, asking me to help financially. The anger I felt was almost physical, a pressure in my chest, a heat rising through my body. I remembered every night I went hungry, every tear, every moment I felt abandoned. For the first time, I realized I had a real choice: give in and pay, or set limits and allow each of us to face the consequences of our own decisions. Joanna's call, asking for financial help, paralyzed me for days. I sat on the floor of my studio, surrounded by my paintings, feeling a giant knot in my chest. My body trembled, my hands sweated, my heart pounded as if it were about to explode. I relived every humiliation I'd endured, being kicked out, rejected, called a failure. The anger was so intense it made my head hurt. At the same time, I felt guilty for not being the perfect son they wanted. It was an internal conflict that left me exhausted. For entire nights I lay awake, wondering, should I give in? Should I help them? But every memory of abandonment reminded me that my life could no longer be shaped by others. I needed clarity. I needed to find my strength. I needed to make decisions consciously, not out of fear or obligation. Anxiety suffocated me, and my stomach ached, as if every wrong thought could bring me down. It was at that moment that I realized that everything I had achieved, every small success, every satisfied client, every art exhibition, was the result of effort, persistence, and courage. I couldn't give up my freedom now, even under emotional pressure. I decided to face the situation head-on. I arranged to meet my parents and sister at a discreet cafe, without expectations. The walk there seemed endless. Each step felt like it carried years of pain. My body was tense, my hands cold, my breath shallow. When I walked in, I saw them. Joanna dejected, my mother with a weary look, and my father trying to maintain a superior posture. They began to talk about the debt, how much they were suffering, how much they needed my help. Hearing those words made me feel physically angry, as if a giant weight was crushing my chest. For years, they had watched me fail, and now they expected me to pay for their mistakes. I felt like screaming, crying, running all at once, but I took a deep breath and decided the only way to deal with it was with firmness and clarity. My voice trembled at first, but then steadied. I explained how I felt cast out and rejected, how I had survived alone, how I had rebuilt my life through my own efforts. Every word was charged with emotion. Every painful memory returned like a wave crashing against my body. They tried to justify themselves. My mother said she did what she thought was best. My father said I was ungrateful. I felt my body react, heat rising in my face, hands tightening around the glass I was holding, heart racing. I cried in front of them, something I had never done before. I told them about my hungry nights, about the anxiety, about every hidden tear in the college bathroom, about every opportunity I'd lost because they'd abandoned me. Each word was like opening an old wound, but also like cleansing it. The physical sensation of anger and sadness mingling was intense. I felt like I had to expel all the accumulated pain of the past few years in one go. It was liberating and painful. For the first time, I let my vulnerability show without fear of judgment. After saying everything, I made my choice. I said I wouldn't pay Joanna's debt, that each of us needed to deal with the consequences of our own decisions. My voice was firm, but my body still felt the tension and butterflies of facing my family. I felt a mixture of relief and guilt, as if I were betraying the idea of a dutiful son. But at the same time, I realized this was the most fair decision I could make, both for myself and for them. For the first time, I felt my life was truly under my control. Liberation didn't come in a magical instant, but as a constant feeling that I no longer needed to nullify myself, that I could exist on my own. I left that cafe feeling like I'd closed a circle. My heart was still beating fast, but in a different, lighter way. As I walked to my studio, my legs felt shaky and my body tired, but I also felt pride. Pride for having survived, pride for having maintained my principles, pride for finally respecting my own life. That experience taught me that facing the past and setting boundaries is painful, but essential. I was free from the obligation to live the life others wanted for me. After the confrontation with my family, I realized my life needed complete focus on myself and what I truly loved: art. I returned to my studio with a different energy, as if each brushstroke were a reaffirmation of my freedom. I still had insecurities and fear of failure, but now my motivation came from within, not from external expectations. I began to better organize my work. I created a portfolio, began seeking partnerships with small galleries and cafes, invested in social media, and learned how to negotiate with clients. Each step was an arduous learning experience. I remember sleepless nights, working on spreadsheets, responding to client messages, preparing canvases, while my body ached and my eyes burned with fatigue. But there was a sense of purpose I had never felt before. The pressure I felt was no longer to be accepted, but to be true to myself. I felt my heart race every time a sale came in, not for the money, but for the recognition that I was on the right path. My self-esteem slowly began to rebuild. The pain of the past was still there, but now I could look at it and transform it into strength. Every difficulty, every stumble, was a reminder of how hard I had fought, how many times I had gotten up after falling. The physical sensation of tension still lingered occasionally, but at the end of the day, the exhaustion was accompanied by a deep satisfaction that filled me with life. My reputation as an artist began to grow slowly. First, friends and acquaintances bought my paintings, then small galleries and home decor stores. Each sale was celebrated as a major victory. I felt a mixture of joy and disbelief. After so many years of rejection and pain, my work finally had value to others. There were days when I would walk down the street, feeling the wind on my face, and remember the nights I slept on a friend's couch, hungry and afraid. The high, physical memories of those hardships still haunted me. Calloused hands, aching back, eyes tired from studying late. But the feeling of progress and freedom outweighed any painful memories. I also began to realize that emotional independence was more important than any external recognition. I learned to validate my own achievements, to celebrate each small victory, and to forgive myself for my failures. The anger toward my parents still lingered, but it no longer controlled me. I had built a life. That made sense to me, and that was what truly mattered. I felt my body relax, my chest open, as if I could finally breathe without the crushing pressure of other people's expectations. Even as my career flourished, there were moments of doubt and loneliness. I often wondered if I would have been more successful if I had followed the path my parents wanted, or if I would have more financial stability. These thoughts provoked anxiety, a tight feeling in my chest, cold hands, and a racing heart. But instead of paralyzing me, I began to use these emotions as creative fuel. Each painting reflected not only my technique, but also my story, my pain, my victories, and my newfound freedom. I learned to embrace my emotions, not to run away from them, and this transformed my work and my personal life. At the same time, I established clear boundaries with my family. I maintained minimal contact, enough for politeness and cordiality, but without allowing them to interfere with my decisions or feelings. The feeling of autonomy was incredible. For the first time, my body felt light, my heart calm, and my mind focused on creating and evolving, rather than trying to emotionally survive external expectations. Recognition arrived in unexpected ways. Clients began recommending my work, larger galleries invited me to exhibitions, and my art began generating consistent income. The feeling of financial security was new, but it couldn't compare to the feeling of personal achievement. Each visit, each positive comment, each sale brought a mixture of gratitude and pride, and a physical relief that I felt in my chest and shoulders, as if an invisible burden had been lifted. I learned to manage success with humility and discipline, and also to handle criticism without losing self-confidence. Anxiety still surfaced in moments of pressure, but it was different. Now I had the emotional tools to face it, and I knew that my story and my efforts sustained me. I felt each victory in my body and soul, and the physical exhaustion of intense work was accompanied by a profound pleasure, a feeling that I was finally living my own life. Today, at 33, I look back and see all the pain, rejection, and struggle as an essential part of my journey. Every tear, every crisis, every sleepless night was a brick in the construction of my freedom and self-esteem. I still carry emotional scars. Sometimes my chest tightens remembering the rejection, but they don't define me. I am the result of persistence, of the courage to choose my own life and transform pain into strength and art. The physical sensation of breathing deeply, walking confidently, looking at my canvases and feeling genuine pride is incomparable. I learned to respect my limits, to value my work, to prioritize my mental and emotional health. I understood that life will never be perfect, but authenticity is more important than any external approval. And the feeling of finally feeling whole, of being able to exist without fear and guilt, is something that every cell in my body celebrates every day. Today, looking back, I can feel the intensity of every moment I lived, every tear I shed alone, every night I felt hungry or afraid. Every rejection from my family still echoes in my memory, but it no longer dominates me. My body still reacts. Sometimes I feel a tightness in my chest, cold hands, or tension in my shoulders when I remember difficult moments. But this reaction is now accompanied by strength, learning, And pride. I learned that life is made of choices and that it's impossible to please everyone without losing yourself. I chose my happiness and my freedom. I learned that there is no victory without effort, that every fall is an opportunity to rise stronger, that pain is inevitable, but it doesn't have to be eternal. The feeling of achieving something with my own hands, of creating and living from what I love, is something that fulfills me deeply. Today, I know my parents will never fully understand my journey, but I don't need their approval. My art, my work, my daily effort, and my self-respect are enough. Every morning I wake up and look at my screens, I feel a physical gratitude, an energy that runs through my arms, legs, and chest, reminding me that I survived, that I won, and that I can inspire others to do the same. What impacted me most during this process was realizing that overcoming obstacles isn't linear. There are days when I still feel afraid of failure. Days when the memory of rejection comes back strong and my body reacts with tension, rapid breathing, and a racing heart. But the difference is that today I know how to deal with it. I transform anxiety into focus, pain into creativity, anger into determination. Every painting I do is an expression of this. Every satisfied client is a reminder that my choice to live according to my truth was worth it. Looking at Joanna and realizing that life also demands our choices from each person brought me clarity about responsibility and limits. I can't carry the weight of other people's decisions, and that's liberating. The feeling of autonomy is physical, relaxed shoulders, deep breathing, open chest. It's the confirmation that I can exist on my own, without fear or guilt. I learned that courage is not the absence of fear, but acting despite it. Every step I took alone, every work sold, every exhibition held required courage. My body still bears remnants of the past, tense muscles, calloused hands, tired eyes, but it also holds the strength and resilience I built. The feeling of conquering my own life, of creating without depending on the approval of others, is incomparable. I understood that overcoming is an ongoing process, requiring patience, discipline, and self-compassion. The pride I feel when I look at my achievements is accompanied by humility, because I know that every mistake, every stumble, every tear contributed to who I am today. Finally, I can confidently say, I survived. I overcame, and I keep going.